in online marketing, execution is built around copywriting. It's built around your message, whether that message is in an ad or if it's on a landing page or if it's a sales page. How you're getting out there to the world is through words, not through platforms.
Welcome back to the Talking Web Marketing Podcast with myself, Ilana Wexler. This is a show where we reveal the best tips, tricks, and tactics to increasing your website traffic and then converting that traffic into leads and sales. We also discuss what's working right now in the ever-changing world of web marketing so you can apply it to your business. Welcome back to another episode of Talking Web Marketing. I'm your host, Ilana Wexler, and today we are talking about a very interesting and important topic, and that topic is copywriting. And regardless of what you're doing from an online marketing perspective, be it sort of trying to promote some organic results in Google, to running paid Google traffic, to Facebook ads, to anything that you are promoting and running online, copywriting is an important factor, and it's going to come into play in any kind of marketing that you do. So I have brought on a copywriting expert called Sue Rice. She is our first repeat guest on this show. She was one of the first guests that I interviewed, and I've asked Sue to come on and talk about the 9 copywriting mistakes that she sees people make. So obviously, when you listen to these 9 mistakes, and if you avoid making these mistakes, then you are well on your way to writing some good, effective, and compelling copy, which is designed to convert, which is what it's all about. If you like what you hear on this episode, you can download our summary of these show notes at talkingwebmarketing.com. That does redirect you to the podcast section on our website, and you can download the PDF summary so you don't have to worry about furiously making notes, or if you're listening to this while you're walking or in the car, don't worry, you can just download the show notes and we've done all that heavy lifting for you. So let's get stuck in today's show.
Thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here.
It's wonderful to have you back. And you're talking about a topic which comes into play so much in, I guess, the type of work that I do, which is writing ads. And there's a whole part of my, setting up all the ads, which is the targeting and the bidding and all that kind of fun stuff that I play around with. But a serious piece of the puzzle is in copywriting and writing good ads. And I would almost say that copywriting is probably the most important part of, I guess, creating good ads. So I thought I have to bring on an expert to talk about copywriting in relation to writing good ads. So that's why I've asked you back, Sue, and it's so lovely that you've said yes, so thank you. Before we kind of go into the 9 biggest copywriting mistakes, because they're so important for people to be aware of, do you maybe want to just touch on why you think copywriting is so important? Like, why is it something that people should be paying attention to? What's the difference, that it can have on someone's business if they've got really good copy versus, let's say, mediocre or average copy?
I'm a biased source. Probably should preface everything I say by that. But the way I see it is your message is everything. People are busy, creating complicated funnels with all the boxes but the boxes need to be filled with the message. The best design funnel in the world that has a mediocre, lackluster message is not going to get you the results that you want. So master your message really, to me, is everything. And I often think of when I started off my career in traditional advertising, and I worked for a advertising agency called BBDO, and the creative director there was a guy named Phil Dusenberry. And I can remember him he used to always say execution is strategy, right? And to me, basically, in online marketing, execution is built around copywriting. It's built around your message, whether that message is in an ad or if it's on a landing page or if it's a sales page. How you're getting out there to the world is through words, not through platforms. And I think a lot of people forget that, or they don't forget it and they just feel really uncomfortable about the writing piece, if that makes sense. And I think one of the reasons people do feel uncomfortable is that writing, like how we learned how to write in school, and copywriting, which is a persuasive exercise, is they're two different beasts, right? It's like it would be like comparing a Great Dane and a Chihuahua, right? They're just totally different. They're both dogs and they're both writing, right? But they're completely different types of writing. And trying to lead a sort of a cold prospect from that cold state to a warm, excited buyer who's taking out the credit card, takes a little bit of you need to understand how to do that. And I think that's one of the reasons why people feel uncomfortable with it. I mean, I think people feel uncomfortable with writing in general, but I think persuasive writing puts the bar that much higher, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I guess you would see a lot of the classic mistakes that people make, which is kind of what we're going to talk about on today's episode, that hinder their ability to convey that message to people. So what would you say is the first mistake that you see people make when they would you say this is more like trying to write their own copy or even in hiring someone?
Well, one thing I would like to say is I don't want to do doom and gloom here, because I actually think that if just writing, just being mindful of a few main points, anyone can start writing persuasively. So it's not like, oh my gosh, no one can do it. But I feel like it's like we almost have to untrain ourselves from what we learned about writing in school to writing for online copy, to get people to buy, either to take the next step or to buy our products or services. So it's like almost unlearning things versus learning things. So I mean, one of the things that people I think make a big mistake of is they write too stiffly and too formally and almost in a distant way. And the way a really good trick, and I say this to everyone that comes to me for help or consultation, is literally what you want to do is write like you talk. And that means something as simple as recording your message, saying it like you would be like you and I are talking right now, get someone to transcribe it or transcribe it yourself, and then you have 90% of your copies already written, but it will sound much more natural. It will sound much more like you're talking to a real individual rather than that sort of corporate speak. Conversational. Yes, that's right. So that's one, and that's a classic mistake, and it's a super easy thing to fix.
So would you recommend, so just on that, would you recommend to write conversationally even on like a sales page? I mean, I could kind of see that applying to emails, because I know I write very conversationally in emails, but would you still do that on like a sales page when or an about page?
I think so. I mean, this is slightly subjective what I'm saying here, and I think maybe there will be people who might disagree with me, but I feel when I look at how, and there are a lot of very old school direct response copywriters that write in the way that direct response has always been written in the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, et cetera. But I feel like while human beings don't change and the triggers that cause people to act haven't changed, I do think the context has changed, right? And we do live in a social media world. And I see a lot of sales letters that have a very sort of chatty style, even like kind of wink at the reader, if you will, you get me on that, don't you, kind of thing. And I think that works really well because that's what we're used to seeing on, our Instagram and Facebook feeds, right? So I feel like, again, of course, it's going to depend on the audience, but a lot of times I think a little bit more relaxed sales copy style can work really, really well, even in a sales letter.
Okay, cool. All right, what's mistake number 2?
So number 2, I think, is more of a strategic mistake, which is not being focused enough, right? Not really understanding every piece of copy that you write, whether it's an email or a landing page, needs to really have one thought through it. So when if it's not focused enough, if you don't understand who you're talking to, it's like the people call it the rule of one, right? You have one person you're talking to and you're asking them to do one thing, right? And I find that that's a tough thing for people to do sometimes. They kind of put everything but everything but the kitchen sink in, and what happens is it dilutes the message. So it's really less is more is really the rule when it comes to, when you sit down to write an email or you sit down to write a landing page, just think, who am I talking to? And that should be one person. And if you have multiple audiences, that means you should be probably writing 3 different versions of your landing page, right? And rather than clumping all your audiences together, because every time you have more than sort of one reader or prospect in mind, it will mean by definition that your message is diluted, right? It would be like if you were talking one-on-one with someone, or if you were talking to a giant audience of 5,000. You're going to dilute the power of your message.
I would imagine people struggle with that though, because it's hard to resist that temptation to leave people out. And how do you decide who to leave out?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's interesting because the more sort of, I've been doing this for many, many years now, but the more I see copy, the more I write copy myself, I realize that the real power of copy comes when you really know who your reader is. And the problem is a lot of us just shrug off, oh yeah, I know who I'm talking to. I know who my avatar is. But do we really? I think that we have to dig really deep, and it's work to do that, but it will really pay off in the copy, because if we have a vague notion who we're talking to, or if we can imagine that person literally sitting next to us, the conversation will be completely different. One will be sort of vague, sort of generalities, and the other one, it would be like you and me speaking. I would talk to you much more specifically about what's happening in your life, right? Rather than just sort of someone I've never met before. And I think that's where the magic of copy comes, and it's the area that a lot of people shortcut on, because they just sort of shrug it off and say, oh, I know who it is, but they don't really.
Yeah, interesting. I'm mindful of the time and to keep going in our 9 mistakes, but I want to just sort of ask you one more question on this point of what would you, and maybe it's almost like another episode in itself, but what would you say is sort of the best way that people can really, truly understand who they're talking to, or who all their customers are? I mean, you do all this marketing, you get it out there, and then it's like, well, how do you know who's listening,
Well, you know what? I'm sort of long on the tooth as I am. I'm actually still learning new ways of doing this, right? So I'll give you a couple really good. First of all, one of the sort of copywriting kind of old time rules is to understand where your customer is on the journey, right? So if you're selling something, so there's people who are completely unaware that they even have a problem. Right?
Yep.
Then there are people who understand they have a problem. They're called problem aware, but they don't really know what the solution is. They don't know what the solution choices are. Then you have people who are sort of solution aware. They know that, to get more leads, they need Facebook ads, but they don't really know how to choose between the different solutions. And then there are people who are product aware, right? Who know that, you have a service to help them with their Facebook ads. So and then there's people who are super, super aware, just basically ready to take their credit card out, right? So how you talk to that person, if someone's completely unaware that even Facebook ads exist, you're going to talk to them differently than you would someone who knows about your specific service, right? So that's the first question you need to ask is, where is my ideal prospect on that sort of continuum from completely unaware that they even have a problem to super aware of me and my products, right? Most people fall in the area of they're either problem aware, they understand they've got a problem, but they don't know the solutions, or they're solution aware, but they don't know how to pick. Most people fall into those categories. So that's one thing to ask yourself. Yeah. But one of the tricks that I've learned recently, which is really helping me and my team a lot, is different ways of researching what people are thinking. So most people just research and they just do, sort of some Google research and then they stop there. But a great way to get sort of in the mind of your ideal prospect is to go to similar competitor products that, it could even be like not the same exact type of service, but it could be a book about the topic that you are an expert in, and look at the reviews. Right? Mm-hmm. Go to Amazon, look at the reviews, and not the 5-star reviews, but look at the 4, 3, and 2-star reviews, because you'll start hearing some themes about what the problems people are having, right? And where the product fell short, what they're looking for, right? And you can do the same thing on forums. You can do the same thing on, but the idea is the best way to get into the minds of other people is to actually listen to what they're saying, not us creating like on paper what they might be saying, right?
Yeah.
And so it's like comes alive and it feels much more genuine. And if you start doing that, start sort of exporting some of those insights into your copy is going to feel much richer too, if that makes sense. I mean, and not summarize what they're saying, but like actually bring in what they're saying, right? Because I've been doing a lot of research on that in the last year or so, using that technique, and it's really, really very enlightening how people talk about different topics, and in the problems that come up in any given area are pretty consistent, right? Mm. Yeah. So that's a good way of getting a handle on, because you don't want to just like sort of be able to demographically describe them. You want to get in their heads. You want to really understand everyone says, well, you want to understand their pain points, but it's much better if they're articulating the pain points. You can feel them much more deeply, rather than if we're kind of like imagining what their pain points are, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. It's funny. I always think when I am writing ad copy for, some of my clients or helping people write better ads, I always say to people, you want the reader of your ad to think, oh my God, they read my mind, which is exactly that kind of,
Yeah, and if you do mining of reviews, whether it could be on, there are lots of different places to get reviews, your competitor products, there's a lot of different ways to find it. But by doing that, you are literally, you're not reading their minds. They're like handing over their thoughts to you. Exactly. And it's not that, well, that's the whole thing. That's actually the mistake people make, is they guess.
Yeah.
That's the big mistake. And you don't have to guess, because we live in this wonderful environment where we have access to what people are thinking. And they will, when you repeat it back to them, they'll say, oh my gosh, she totally, or he totally gets me. And that's because you've taken that little bit of extra time. We're talking about maybe 3 or 4 extra hours to do a little bit deeper research into what people are actually saying, and use those words. Don't summarize those words. Literally copy and paste those words. Obviously, you have to put it into a sort of an argument, but I feel like that's like untapped potential in terms of copy. So you don't have to be a copywriter to use that. Anyone could use that technique.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's a big giant tip.
Yeah, nice. I like it. All right. Mistake number 3.
So I've kind of like it's kind of reiterating what I just said. I think
I
one
tend to
of
do
the
that. I'm sorry. That was my fault.
That's no, it's no, but the next point is that people often aren't specific enough, and it's kind of a little bit about what I just said. So what a lot of people will do, imagine that you see a comment where people say something like, "Oh, the customer service was just so bad," or something, right? So that was clearly a bad pain point. So someone might do is take that and say, "Oh, we have excellent customer service," right? So they kind of summarize the thoughts of the person. But what you want to do is you want to specifically use that language. Being specific rather than, you're not writing an essay, you're writing raw thoughts and emotions to get people to, so that people can relate to it. So I think not being specific enough and summarizing things, and like you could say, you could say something like, "Oh, his business boomed," right? Or you could say his sales went from $30,000 a month to $42,320 a month overnight, right? And the latter is much, I mean, that's probably a bad example, but the latter is still stronger, right? Rather than your business boomed, or you actually, hear the numbers, or you get the specifics. That, the more specific you can be in your language, that's not a difficult thing to do, because, the funny thing is we all do that when we tell stories every day around the table, right? Yeah. We're using those specifics, but when we come to write, we tend to forget that. It just brings everything alive much more rather than just sort of generalizing.
I think it also makes it a lot more believable because it is so specific. I mean, you can't just pluck a number like that out of the air. It has to be calculated and measured, so therefore it feels more believable, I think.
Yes, I think so too. And even if the number jump isn't big, and sometimes even modest increases are more believable, right?
Well, that's right, exactly.
When you say someone goes from 0 to 1,000,000 in 3 minutes, like, oh yeah, right, next. I wasn't born yesterday, So I feel like if people are interested, because a lot of people are starting out, and they would be really interested in how someone increased their income every month by $5,000 or $7,000 versus 70,000, right? Yeah. Because it's also something that people can grasp and understand.
It's probably more relatable as well.
It's more relatable, exactly.
Okay, that's a good tip. So use specifics in your copy, and that hopefully will be more persuasive. What about mistake number 4?
Number 4 is pretty much everyone makes this mistake, which is, and I understand why they do it, but I mean, all these things are related, right? But mistake number 4 is talking too much about yourself.
Right.
Okay, and I understand why we all do it, because we're all out there writing persuasive copy for people to buy our products and services. So we feel like it's natural for us to be talking about ourselves. But I mean, I think that whenever you can, every single word that you write needs to be thought about from the perspective of your prospect, right? Including things as obviously about you as an about page. You should think about how you can craft your about page so it's not about you, but about how you can help them solve their problem. You right? You see what I'm saying? And I feel like that you just have to open up your inbox to see what a travesty that is. It's all about me, buy, and people don't really, they don't really care about what you have. They do care about how you might be able to help them and how you might help them solve their problems. But this is it's a almost everyone does it by reflex as they talk about themselves.
But I guess I think the struggle, if I could, I guess relate on some level, and I'm sure others could relate to this as well, is that how do you write about how you can help someone without talking about yourself? Do you know what I mean?
Right. Right. You obviously you have to tell what your product is or your service is, but it needs to be first discussed in terms of what their problem is and how you get their problem.
Right.
Too many people lead with their product and service and what they can do and how they're great and everything. When people, what they really want is to know, people want to know that you can help them. And so they want to know about that first, and then they need to be convinced that your product is the right fit, right?
Right.
But I feel like 90% of the copy is over promotional.
Look, sure, I could I would definitely agree with you on that, being on the receiving end of so many of these email people that just like it's crazy what they send people into their inbox. I mean, I find it interesting to see, not from the view of a potential customer, but from the lens of a fellow marketer, and I just think it's crazy what some people write. But I mean, it must work for some people, I guess. Or not.
Well,
I don't
yeah.
know.
I mean, yeah, I think it depends on a lot of things. It depends on how well they're known. But I feel like whenever possible, you wouldn't do that with a friend, right? Whenever possible, think about your copy as a conversation between you and another real life human being. And you would never walk in and have a lunch with someone and like start the conversation off with how great you are and what you can do for them. You wouldn't, I mean, most people wouldn't do that, right? I say the same thing about emails. What a lot of people will set up their autoresponder sequence, 5, 10, maybe even 20 emails, and then they never send another email. It would be like meeting someone at a party saying, hey, I think I've got something that might be interesting. We can talk together. Let's start a conversation. And then you just stop calling. You would never do that. You would never do that in real. I mean, you could do that, but when you send that email 8 months later, the person is probably not going to be that receptive to you if they even remember who you are, right?
Who's that person again?
Yeah. So I that's the way I like to look at it. I like to look at it as a conversation between two people. And I think the more you can think about it that way, then think about how you would talk to your friends or your family or your kids. I feel like that relaxes the conversation and it makes it less promotional, overtly promotional. And oddly enough, the more elegant you are about that, the more you will actually sell. That's the great paradox,
yes,
in my opinion.
Definitely.
Is like the less promotional, overtly promote. You have to be clever about it because you are trying to sell, but the less overtly promotional you are, I mean, I think about it, that it goes all the way, extends all the way to sales calls, which is not copy, but it's sort of the same. It's also a form of communication. I think the less overtly salesy you are, the more likely you are to close. The more you actually reach out and say, hey, let's look at this problem. Let's figure out, how maybe you can solve this problem rather than trying to go for the sale first off, the more likely you will be to actually get the sale in the end. So I think there's a level of discomfort around that, but I actually think that's really true.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with you. Okay, what about mistake number 5?
So another mistake people make is sort of more of a strategic mistake, which is understanding how their copy fits into the whole sales process. It's sort of been like this sort of funnel, whatever, obsession in the last couple years, I would say. And I feel like copy often is an afterthought. And I feel that copy I'm not sure if I would say that copy leads, because setting up a funnel is an important task to do. But the copy is what is the glue that brings it together. And I would say that in the funnel, what I think are sort of the three most important sort of conversion assets are going to be your landing page for your lead magnet, your email sequences, and your sales page, right?
Yep.
And those are the three pieces that you really need to pay attention to. And so I like simple funnels, not super complicated, that concentrate on those three stages, right? The attraction, the nurturing, and then the conversion,
Yep.
which is the sales page. And I feel like people don't often go through funnels in a linear fashion, as we all know, but at least you've covered your bases with those three, and they should work well together. But I oftentimes feel that the copy is almost an afterthought. It's just sort of thrown in there, and it's not really thought through. It's a system, right? Rather than disjointed pieces thrown together. And I think if you think about it that way, again, it's like a conversation that should make sense.
Yeah. Well, I mean, because it's the journey of one person, rather than different pieces stuck together. But people often are trying, have different pieces of the puzzle and swap different pieces. And so therefore it's hard to create uniformity for that process, because so many pieces keep getting moved around. Just in my experience of dealing with clients, they'll come to me having, a part of a funnel, and we have to swap a part of it because it's not really working. And then therefore the copy is not completely in line with what was originally created. I'm not articulating myself very well.
Yeah.
But do you know what I mean? Like different pieces are swapped from what was originally planned, and then the messaging is sort of a little bit disjointed.
That's right. And I think also there's a confusion. One thing I see a lot is there's a little bit of, this is actually a separate point. I can't remember what number we're on now, but
we're on 5.
Right. So this is like this number 6.
Okay, let's go.
I think there's a little bit, I brought up the fact that there's three pieces of, those three pieces, your landing page to get people into the funnel, the email, and the sales page are sort of like the triumvirate of copy power, right?
Yes.
But there are other pieces that you need in place, right? You need your website pages. There's a lot of other pieces that you need that help, or they're like the support troop, right? But how you write a homepage, I think there's a lot of confusion about how to write these different things. To me, website pages are written in a different way than heavy duty conversion writing asset like a sales page, right? So I find that sometimes people get that kind of confused, and they try to sell on their homepage when in fact their homepage is like, the way I look at the homepage, it's like a first impression page, right? So that, you're like the policeman at the intersection saying, if you want to know more about my services, you go here. If you want to know more about me, you go here. If you want to know, et cetera. But it's not necessarily a sales page, right? It's more, I've landed in the right place page.
Well, it's like you've arrived at a hotel and you're going to check in at the reception, and the receptionist tells you, okay, your room is down the corridor and the facilities are to your right, and blah, 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 that kind of thing.
That's exactly right. So it's, and I think there's a little bit of confusion about that. I would say website pages are super, super important. There's no doubt about that, because they do give people that first impression about you, but that's not the place where you're going to be doing the heavy lifting sales pitch.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah. It's like someone walking into a shop, and as soon as they walk in, the sales assistant says, "Do you want to buy this?" I was like, "No, I want to look around a little bit. I want to try a dress on, and I want to try these earrings on, or whatever."
Exactly. I mean, that whole thing, I love that analogy because I actually think that needs to be underlying everything you do, coming back to the point about being over promotional, because you want to give people a relaxed sense because people are not on your timetable. There might be a fantastic client that's just not ready for you until 9 months from now. And that's totally fine,
That's right.
right?
Yep, exactly.
And people, I see sometimes autoresponder sequences that don't convert the way people like, but you don't really know what seeds you've planted and what tree will grow from that. That's why you have to continue to nurture it. Just because in the 5 days you had an autoresponder sequence they didn't convert doesn't mean they're not great prospects.
Exactly.
So that's actually number 7.
Number 7.
That people aren't on your timetable. So and that I mean, and people. I do think the framework of a funnel is super. It's very useful as a marketing tool for all of us who are online marketers. But I also think that we need to be gentle with ourselves and with our prospects because, I mean, I know people who see one thing and they go immediately, they don't go to the lower end product. They go buy the highest level product the next day. Another person waits 10 months to buy the low end, but ultimately ends up buying the higher end, right? Every journey is going to be different. And so you need to sort of build out the funnel, but also with the mindset that, people can take time. What you want to be is you want to be in their in top of mind when they actually are ready. That the only way to do that is to continue specifically with your email marketing, right? Because you need to be nurturing that relationship with them.
Yeah. No, I really like that one because I can't stand all those pushy sales emails and 36 hours left and 35 hours left. And I mean, there's a time and a place for that, of course, when you're doing something with a launch that ends, but the continual bombardment of all these time frames and pushing you to kind of make a decision now, it's just it's quite exhausting as a consumer. So
Yeah, I mean, that's why I think that people, there's a sort of, I feel like a lot of direct response needs to be somewhat modified. There are people who will like slay me for saying this, but because of the context in which people are in, because we're all getting those, you have to act in the next 30 seconds every 3 minutes of the day. So at a certain point, they become less effective.
That's right. Exactly. They lose their power because it happens all the time.
Having said that, that is mistake number 8, I believe we're
Number
on.
8. It's not
Yeah.
to use a deadline.
Is that I'm not sure I would say deadline, but you do need to prod people into action.
Okay.
And there are many different ways of doing that. Deadlines are one of them. Scarcity of quantity is another one. But it needs to, there are different ways that you can do it. Most people just like slap on, it's, it ends at midnight kind of thing. But I feel like it needs to be elaborated a little bit more than that. But people do need to feel like the train's going out of the station.
Right.
And if they don't get on, because people, it's just the nature of the human psyche is that we have, fear of missing out.
So they're sitting on the fence. Are you on or are you off?
I mean, I've seen it. I've been behind the scenes of so many email campaigns, and I can see it. If you have just sort of, call me when you want, right? That kind of call to action. Or, if you click here in the next 2 hours, you're going to get a 20% discount. Every single time there's a spike.
Yeah. Because people will inherently delay making a decision if they can.
That's right. It just, I mean, it's totally fine. It just is. But the question is how you actually use that. Because I think in everything that you want to do, it's just like you would want to do in your daily interactions. You want to have, it needs to be, it needs to have a certain elegance to it, is the best way to describe it, right? It has, because if you're also hitting them over the head with a hammer every 30 seconds about time delays and scarcities, it starts to sound hollow. It's like someone's crying fire, right?
Totally.
And so, you do need to handle it with a certain dexterity so that it feels genuine. And you also there need to be moments when you're having a dialogue with them where nothing's being sold, right? Where
100%.
you're sharing things just like you would with a person. You're not like, imagine if every single time you talk to your best friend, she was like trying to sell you something. It's like that would not be your best friend for very long.
No, definitely not.
Right? And people are like, oh no, people are unsubscribing. They want off my list. Yeah, there's a reason. But I'll tell you, even I've seen, really almost hostile lists transform in the matter of a few months.
Wow.
They can be, oh my gosh, the service is bad. He's always promoting. But if you start, sort of massaging that relationship, you can really change quite dramatically, quite quickly.
Yeah, amazing. Okay,
Yeah.
mistake number 9, the lucky last but not least.
Well, this is, of course, my favorite one, as you can only guess what this is. Well, so the main mistake people make is they don't wrap their message up in a story.
Ah, yes.
It's what I call it, my Tiffany box. It's like, it's amazing, a lot of these mistakes that we talked about can be solved just by doing that, right?
Yeah.
All that over promotion and everything. It's sort of, the story can be a little bit the Trojan horse, right? You wrap it up, you engage people, they're interested in what you're saying, and then ever so gently you nudge them into, and I have something that can help you with this. Now most people, would like to sort of clarify something, because everyone talks about stories right now. But what 90% of the people I see talking about stories, they're talking about the stories of their companies, the story of the business owner, the stories of their clients. And all those stories are great. There's nothing wrong with them. But what I'd like to suggest is that there are millions of other stories that could engage your reader and be interesting to them. It's sort of like using story as a metaphor. Does that make sense? So you write a story that maybe even doesn't have anything to do with the category you're in, but it engages your reader, and then you link that story up to your product. You kind of create a bridge between it, so that it's like entertainment. It's selling, it's story selling, and that's really, really powerful. And pretty much no one does that.
Yeah. So I can imagine some listeners listening to this would think, but where do you find stories from? I don't know that many stories. How would you get, your source of inspiration for stories?
I mean, it's a great question. I mean, there's a million different ways that you can get them. But you can't Google.
That's right.
Story. I want a story that illustrates leadership. I mean, that you probably could find stories on that, but it's not always obvious, because I think of stories almost as a metaphor. When you think about, it's like, I think I might have even said this on our first interview. I can't remember, but so, there's this great story about this guy who went to Tokyo in 1923 or something. I'm probably getting that date wrong, to run the marathon there. And he got like three-fourths of the way through, and then he just sort of got sidelined, and I think had a Japanese beer and just didn't even finish the marathon, right? And he left. He was embarrassed, and he left Japan. He was American and went back to America. And then he, like 55 years later, he came back to
55
complete the marathon.
years.
Yes, it was like 55 years, 12 hours, 30 seconds. I don't know. He came back to finish the marathon. So that's a story that has nothing to do with probably anyone that's listening to this, their products. But what you could do, I'm just giving it as an example, is you could say, you know, but I promise when you use my service, it's not going to take that long to get the results, right? Something like that, right?
Right.
And then you invite them in to talk to, and then you normally would take them to a sales page or have them, invite them to call you or whatever it is. But you could have stories about speed. You could have stories about making mistakes. They can come from, children's books and Aesop's fables, and you can look at the BBC every day. Their stories are everywhere.
If you know where to look.
Yeah, I mean, they really are everywhere when you think about it. I saw a statistic the other day, which I absolutely love, which is that 65% of our conversation is gossip.
Wow.
But gossip are stories. We're telling stories about people we know, right? That's what they are.
Yeah.
That's what we do.
Remember.
And that's the thing that I remember the most is when when my daughter was in the Fontainebleau. They have a bilingual. My daughter went to high school in Fontainebleau in France, and it's like there's a little Anglophone section, and I taught a class there about communications, and I don't know, I can't remember. It was like maybe 2 semesters I did that. And I taught them, about presentation and writing. We did all this stuff. And, but at one juncture, I told a story. And the story was about a man and a woman who did not want to get pregnant again. And they went to the doctor. They said, she can't get pregnant again. We already have 9 kids. And so the doctor gave the couple birth control pills. And so they came back, 6 months later, and she's pregnant. And the doctor's saying, how is this possible? And the husband said, I don't know. I took the pills like you said. So no. And so I told this story about, how communications could go wrong sometimes. And literally 7 years later, one of the kids saw me on the street in Fontainebleau and said, I don't remember anything about what you taught us, but I do remember that story.
Wow, that's funny.
Right? Yeah, that's because stories, there's actually scientific proof. It lights up like all these different areas in our brain that just like rational bullet points don't. And that's why they're so powerful. But like I said, what I would encourage people to think about is it's not just stories about you and your company and your business. It goes well beyond that. It's a way of putting your message in a Tiffany box, a beautiful package that people are going to it won't feel like they're being sold to.
Yeah. Wow. Well, I think your last point really is the supporting point for all the other mistakes, which I'm just going to recap very, very quickly. So the first mistake you mentioned was not to write too stiffly. The second one was not being focused enough, so not being strategic. The third was not being specific enough, so not like using specific numbers, etc. The fourth was talking too much about yourself and not about the ideal customer. The fifth was understanding how copy fits into the sales process. Number 6 was your supporting web pages not doing the heavy lifting of the selling, but sort of welcoming people. The 7th was, what did I write here? People aren't on your timetable, so but you want to ensure you are top of mind for them when they are ready, but not sort of pushing them too much. Number 8 was trying to get to prod people into action. And our last favorite one was incorporating story into a message. Have we left anything off, or does that pretty much cover the classic mistakes that people make?
I think that's pretty much it. I mean, it's interesting listening to them because there's always a strategic element to copy, right? Because copy, really good thinking makes good copy, right?
Yeah, definitely.
So it's all about making sure that you're clear about your ideas. That makes great copy.
Yeah, exactly. And often it helps talking about it with someone, I find, just to articulate what it is you're trying to do. They can sort of help clarify your thought, and then you're clear of what exactly you're offering people just by talking about it with someone, preferably who doesn't even really understand what you do. So you're forced to explain it to them, I find.
Yeah, what is that? I mean, even people that I feel like I'm really focused and clear about other people's businesses, but when it comes to our own, it's always a bigger challenge, right?
Definitely.
I don't know what that's all about, but it's sort of
Yes,
it's just hard sometimes to see. Maybe there are little babies, right?
exactly. Well, you are definitely one of my sounding boards, Sue. So, look, thank you so much for coming on today's episode. I'm sure lots of people are going to want to find out more information about you and your business and what you offer people. So where can our listeners find out more information about you?
Yeah, so you can go to my site, which is Sue Rice, SUERICE.com. I'm so happy because I just got that URL.
Woohoo! Doesn't that feel good?
Oh, yes. Very nice. It's so easy, too.
Too easy. Love it. Alrighty, SueRice.com. Thank you so much.
That's right.
For coming on today's episode. It's been a delight having you back, as you're my first repeat guest, which is pretty exciting. Woohoo! And you've provided a ton of value for all our listeners, so thank you so much. You have been listening to the Talking Web Marketing podcast. For more information or resources on today's episode, head on over to talkingwebmarketing.com.